Hey, how y'all doing? Hope you guys are all staying safe, healthy, and peaceful. And this lecture is part two of Congress, right? In the last video lecture, we left off. I had highlighted the specifics of the quote CARE Act, which is the coronavirus stimulus bill that was passed by both houses of Congress. And I talked about how there was substantial partisan divide between the two sides. And the highlights of the bill, again, are as follows, right? This bill is over $2 trillion. That's the cost to taxpayers, about $2.2 trillion. One part of the bill that got a lot of attention, you guys are probably already aware of this, right? It may have even hit some of your accounts today, right? Is a big portion of the bill was allocations for $1,200 direct payments to every American that sits below $75,000 on their last tax return. And for married couples, it was $2,400, and then plus $500 for each kid. So if you're married, you got $2,400, and if you're married with two kids, you got $3,400, right? So another part of the bill that got a lot of attention, of course, was the extension of unemployment benefits. So in addition to whatever you're eligible for from your state, like for example, in Colorado, the average person only gets $500 to $600 a month in unemployment, right? The federal government's going to slap on $600 a week to everybody who's unemployed. So whatever you qualify for, plus about $2,400 a month, and that'll go for 4 months, right? So that's the government's hope, is that the virus ends before they have to shell out more money, right? To keep people fed and be able to keep them in their homes and mortgage and all that, right? Now, I should point out the government does still get to tax the unemployment, which seems, rather absurd, right? Doesn't something up with that, right? So third part of the bill, so the unemployment, the $1,200 checks, $2,400 if you're married, sent out, the one-time direct payment checks. The third major part of this bill was small business loans by the federal government. Federal government giving out huge business loans to small, medium-sized businesses. And if they actually use the money to keep their employees employed, meaning on their payroll, then they don't have to pay any of the money back. And it's no longer a loan, it becomes a grant, right? So that was a huge portion. That's about $250 billion. And then there was a $500 billion portion. This is the most controversial part. What would any big government bill be without a corporate bailout, right? So the big corporations get a giant chunk too, right? Of course, just like 2008, when we had to bail out the big banks, right? This one also has big corporations getting money, right? Namely, the airline industry and big hospitals. And before you think for a second that these big hospitals, well, you might be thinking, well, they're, come on, man. You can't be opposed to the hospitals who are dealing with this coronavirus getting billions of dollars of aid from taxpayers. But hold on a second here. The hospitals have been for profit for over a decade and a half to 2 decades now, meaning every year the hospitals are turning billions, right, in profit. So they had more than enough money to deal with this crisis and then some, right, based on profits alone. So you kind of see where I'm going with this, right? Now, these are the main chunks, right, of this bill. Now, what are the positives and what are the negatives of the stimulus bill? Well, let's look at the positives. First off, it prevents people from literally starving, right? Or it keeps people in their homes, right? If you think about this, for the next 4 months, every person who's unemployed is going to get a base pay of $2,400 on top of their whatever they qualify for in their state. So let's say in Colorado, I said the average unemployment is $600 a month. Who can live off $600 a month? That's insanely low, right? If you lose your job, you only get $600 a month. You can't live off that, right? So this $2,400 at least added onto that for the next 4 months, at least keeps people in their homes, keeps their electricity on, keeps them fed, etc. Right? So that's definitely a positive. Another positive from this bill, it may, when the crisis passes, it may engender a movement, right? Or like spark a movement to make some of these things more permanent. Following this crisis, it wouldn't be surprising if, because of the stimulus bill, people's expectations for unemployment were to increase. So we might see, instead of $600 in Colorado, maybe when you're out of work, the average becomes $1,200, right? So it's possible this bill will push debate to make unemployment benefits more reasonable and more generous when people lose work, especially when it's no fault of their own, like right now. And it may actually end up pushing discussion for those who are more inclined towards more socialist policies. It may push a discussion for a guaranteed income in our country, where everybody gets a certain money that they're guaranteed, let's say $10,000 a year, and then beyond that, you earn whatever you earn, right? It may lead to that kind of movement. Now, also another positive is that it keeps small businesses in business and not having to lay off so many people. So if this bill works the way it's intended to, there won't be as many layoffs, say a month or two from now, right? The theory is if small businesses are able to receive huge bailout money, they will keep their employees employed, right? And that might stave off some of the massive unemployment. Now, what are some negatives of this thing? Oh gosh, there's a couple too, right? One of the big negatives, of course, is where's this money coming from? $2 trillion, right? That's adding to our debt we already talked about, which is we already had a debt of nearly $24 trillion debt as a nation, which is insane, right? This is only going to add to that. Right now, if you keep trying to print money to finance debt and there's nothing backing that money, you have what? Massive inflation, right? The spending that we're doing right now to combat the coronavirus and its, and the economic fallout from the shutdowns of industries like restaurants and bars, et cetera, leisure and hotels. One of the consequences of that is that it could cause in a year from now or two, a massive financial crisis where a major debt crisis, right? So it's possible that we could have a recovery when we start controlling this virus and then we go back into another nosedive because all of this debt we're paying off becomes unsustainable. What happens when the rest of the world is doing the same thing as we are and we don't have anyone to borrow money off of anymore? What happens then, right? Theory is that countries will keep investing in us because we're the biggest consumer market, but that's what we hope, right? So it could set off a massive crisis, this amounts of spending that we're doing. Another major problem, of course, is corporations receiving huge bailouts, right? I don't know if anybody here finds it a little bit galling that these big corporations, the airline industries, they had billions upon billions in profits over the last 10 years, really since 9/11. They had that dip after 9/11. And then from they got bailed out. Then from 2003 all the way till now, they've been recording record profits. So we're being told that this one nosedive they're having, no pun intended, right, has actually led to them being bankrupted. That doesn't make sense. These airlines have more money than they're letting on, right? More access to credit and resources, right? And the same thing with the hospital industry. Again, don't let it fool you that just because they're the medical industry, that they don't have incredible amounts of money and resources behind them, right? So that's been one of the flaws of it, right? And I'll get you guys a part 3, and we'll talk about the Trump impeachment trials that set off huge partisan divide within Congress, right? Everybody be well. I hope you guys are peaceful.